one of the core tenets that we kind of that I tend to look at things by is I look at everything through Genesis and Exodus, and so when they're leaving Egypt, there's this call that says, like, don't go back to Egypt, right? And basically, Egypt is like a Babylon. It's a place of like power and prestige and all these things. So when you see when they're doing things like Egypt, things that God saved them from, then they're not doing things as well. So in chapter 9, you have God talks to Solomon. Basically, it's like this whole warning, kind of what's going on. It's like, if you got to listen to me, if not, you'll have issues, like that's, and then it reminds him again that that I'm the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that they were enslaved to Egypt. And then right after that, we start talking about the Solomon building the temple, and he's using slave labor to build the temple. All right, so like that's, which is very, very Egypt of them, and not good. And that's if you want to look for a verse there, that's chapter 9, verse 21, kind of near the end. That Solomon raised forced labor as it is to this day. And then they're like, and these were all conquered people, these slave laborers. And in case you miss it, in verse 24, he marries Pharaoh's daughter and puts her in place. Like, so just in case if you missed it, like you can go over there. Like, he's wanting to become Egypt. He's wanting to become Babylon. He's wanting to become all these things. And that's what's going on with Solomon. And the reason why I'm making a big deal of this is chapter 9 sets us up for chapter 10. And for those of us that have Christian baggage, unlike me,
unlike Nick,
that what we understand about Solomon is like, oh, Solomon was so wise, but if it wasn't for his daggum wives, he'd be fine. Like that's, and then you get into some nice nice theology. It's done off of the hip by people that don't know what they're talking about, and they're like, "No, those women always taking us down," and stuff like that. So today in chapter 10 and 11, we see what's actually going on, right? Like with all of his wives, we've kind of already talked. The wives mean basically trade deals. So he's been doing all these trading deals, becoming this big, powerful kingdom, and so we kind of see the downfall here. The thing to watch out for too here, this I think Gloria was with me like in the original Bible studies. I'm not sure you were part of those too. Yeah. I can't remember if you were in all that as well. But first time we kind of went through this years ago, I was like, this is interesting. This is interesting. Like over there. So we're looking for Egypt things. We're looking for power things, and we're also looking at numbers. Now, numbers, how I look at numbers, they're like emojis. So like 12 is a good number. 7 is a number like completeness, and it's like emojis. It doesn't have any concrete meaning, but 6 is kind of an idea of incompleteness. We all know what the big number in Revelation is. It's kind of the full incompleteness, right? Like 666. I wonder if that's going to come up. And so we'll look at all these things. So did I do a good job of catching us up?
Very well done.
Excellent. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Meg. Oh, Kathy. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You could, yeah.
Strange run.
That's.
I'm not sitting here.
That cinnamon is for you.
Oh, okay.
All right. Like that's. She can't see you because you're out of the shot of the.
On purpose.
Yeah. All right. So let's do chapter 10. We'll do the whole chapter and listen to it here. And for everyone, like if your translation is different than ours and it has a different reading, then let us know. All right. So I need to hit share screen. I don't even have the right thing going. Hold on. You think I'd be prepared for this? Nah. Okay. So then now we'll share screen, optimize for video, Click that button, click that button. Here we go. All right. And people online, let me know if the echo does not go away.
And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he wanted to do,
Very good. This is very different. All right, here we go. That's it.
now when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels that bore spices, very much gold, and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. So Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. Then she said to the king,
It was a true report which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. However, I did not believe the words until I came and saw with my own eyes. And indeed, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame of which I heard. Happy are your men, and happy are these your servants, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord has loved Israel forever, therefore he made you king, to do justice and righteousness.
Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, spices in great quantity, and precious stones. There never again came such abundance of spices as the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities of almug wood and precious stones from Ophir. And the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, also harps and stringed instruments for singers. There never again came such almug wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. Now King Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all she desired, whatever she asked, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. The weight of gold that came to Solomon yearly was 666 talents of gold, besides that from the traveling merchants, from the income of traders, from all the kings of Arabia, and from the governors of the country. And King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 shields of hammered gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with pure gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round at the back. There were armrests on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the armrests. 12 lions stood there, one on each side of the 6 steps. Nothing like this had been made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the merchant ships came bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. Now all the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. Each man brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments, armor, spices, horses and mules, at a set rate year by year. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar trees as abundant as the sycamores which are in the lowland. Also Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Kiva. The king's merchants brought them in Kiva at the current price. Now a chariot that was imported from Egypt cost 600 shekels of silver, and a horse 150. And thus, through their agents, they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria.
All right. Fun stuff here. Fun stuff here. So, what stood out to you?
Maybe a dumb question, though.
Yeah?
Apes and peacocks?
Apes and peacocks. Listen, if I started, like, yeah, I think there's a meaning to it. I think it's this. If I started if everything started becoming gold around this place, and I started bringing in like apes and peacocks just walking around and stuff like that, you'd be thinking I was kind of peacocking around, right? Like, it's like, look at this guy. He's really got a lot of abundance. Like that's got some apes laying around and stuff. You would think I'm pretty awesome, wouldn't you? No?
We already have gopher tortoises.
Yeah.
And same little crane.
Yeah. It's close enough. It's close enough.
Peacock can be neat.
Well, and I think it's just like a sign of wealth. Yeah. Like, so that's just signs of just extravagance.
Well, if they do somebody that had peacocks running around, I did sure get out of the car.
Yeah. But especially the apes, because like that's a pretty strong animal, and if you got control of them.
They had a big thing in Fort Pierce some years ago about peacocks on the street. People wanted them gone. People wanted them to stay. They're still there?
Oh, yeah. The house on Lewis Street, and you quite often see them.
Yeah.
No, man. They're loud, too.
They're loud. They attack. They Mexican.
Yeah, they're there.
All right, so what else?
Thank you.
Yeah. What else stood out to you?
When they're describing Solomon's throne, and the lions, and
The lions?
and as they're describing the lions, I got a mental picture of when they would show you the entrance into Egypt and the temples with the Sphinx lined on.
Oh, yeah. That's an interesting imagery. That's interesting, and that's a good example of, because how many lions were there?
12.
12, right? So it's probably one for each of the tribes.
Right.
12 and 2.
The Lion of Judah, but the image was Egypt.
Yeah, and so that's what's probably for the tribes, but it's also like you said, like very Sphinx-like, very powerful, and this whole thing is about how powerful he was.
Well, and the question though too is, were there 12 because he wanted there to be 12, or was it just because he had the 6 steps? Was it an accident?
Well,
like,
I think,
which part was he trying to do? Like, okay, I'm going to make my throne 6 steps because I'm an incomplete king because God is perfect.
Yeah. So that's,
or it was like, no, I want
felt that way. He was incomplete.
Yeah. Like that. And it could be part of that. Mick, you was.
I premise everything you're saying. I don't know what I'm talking about. But Sheba serves a purpose here.
Yeah.
Sheba puts voice to his extravagance.
Yes.
That's what she seems to be all about.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I've heard, not by half. Where we are pointing out the gold over the ivory on the wood, etc. And Sheba says, the real deal here. You have got some real wealth.
Yeah.
extravagant wealth beyond all imagination. Now, having said that, is that merely her purpose to voice his wealth?
Kind of
or is
like a vessel, like type of that's being used by the authors, like that. That's and like I think it could be because she represents, because she's powerful, but she represents all these other powerful kings and queens that are coming in and talking. She says something about him, which I should expect you guys to say about me, where it's like, who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. That's
that thought did cross my mind.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And so, but like, I think that is like what I think she is kind of standing in, but also she's the Queen of Sheba, like outside, very powerful area. And so that's, you can definitely tell there's a lot of pomp and circumstance with her. What kind of stood out?
But again, the Lord is saying, are you listening to her? Are you listening to what she's saying about you?
Now, what do you mean by that?
What I'm suggesting is that Solomon he's being told, not merely by Sheba, but by Sheba as an instrument, as it were.
Yeah.
She is conveying his criticism or his observation about the state of things.
Oh, okay. So so as the reader, like that, and that's an interesting outlook on that. So what you're saying is, as the reader, she's all just feigning praise, but we're going back to that, what God said in chapter 9, and it's like, ooh, you're looking a little bit like Babylon here. You're looking a little bit like Egypt, like you're getting a little too.
If we're to believe that we are all instruments of Christ, somebody is leading Sheba to say what she's saying.
Yeah.
And Solomon's not hearing.
And I also, like, as we were listening to this, I kept thinking about, I think when we talked a few weeks ago, maybe it was last week, about how God never said to build the temple. Like when David wanted the temple built, God said, well, I'm going to build your house, and all of that. So God has never really wanted it. And it seems like God was content with the tent. God.
So how does that figure that Solomon was so successful in doing this if God really didn't ask him to?
So I think, I think you can have, so this is where I think the messiness of this all is. We know that because of what Sheba is saying, we know that Solomon is wise. And in his kingdom here, like, you see that the nation of Israel goes to the next level, but we get next chapter in and the chapter after that, and it all falls apart. Like it all comes crumbling down, and you get to the end of these kings, and I think there's what is there are 12 kings, or I can't remember how many there are. It says on there, I think. I can't remember, but the amount of kings that there are, it's not a ton, and they are taken over by Babylon, and they don't exist anymore. So Solomon is very powerful, very, very much going on here, and there is blessing in that, but it's also, him just being shrewd and all this stuff. But as we kind of look just underneath the surface of what's being written, you're like, this is making me feel uncomfortable by how everything's going here. By it seems too perfect. It seems too perfect. What else kind of stood out to you in this section?
The 666.
Yeah, the 666. When Ed Bach laughed openly during the reading. Yeah, like the 666. Like that's like, and there's nothing bad about 666, like in and of itself, but it's a number of incompletion. You know, it's a number that's often associated with humanity, but I do think it's interesting that it's right here in front of us here, you know, like that's, and look at it's his wealth that is 666, you know, the weight of the gold that came to Solomon yearly was, yeah. Like
yearly is the key. It's almost like each year the gold is becoming more of the idol.
Yeah, with it looking like that. Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's interesting. And so, yeah, we talked about the lions and the steps. Because I remember the first time I read this, and that's why I was like, I think it was in this group when I was reading. I was like, this is it. Like, it's because you have, like, in verse 10, you have, she gave him 120 talents of gold. Like, that's a good number. 12 tribes of Israel. You know, like all those things, and then all of a sudden it's 666, and like you just get all of this wealth and all this, and this comes from someone that really, before I started studying this stuff, I was like, oh, Solomon's a good dude. Like there was nothing wrong with him, and just like you see now, like that he used slave labor to build the temple. This is no, and that's he's doing. I mean, to build God's house with the thing that he used, that God saved his people from, is a little brash. It's a little brash.
So we all have free choice. God gives us.
Oh yeah, and that's what's good about reading this stuff too. This stuff isn't a political cartoon. There's thickness and depth to it. There is good and bad happening at the same time. Like that's how our lives roll around too. You know, there's not really a day where it was all bad, you know, and there's not really too many days where it's all good. Like, so that's, and I think emotional maturity is being able to recognize that and be able to separate the things around.
If I can offer a lawyer-like defense.
Okay.
And this is to God's glory.
Mm-hmm.
And could he do less to God's glory? So, as you say, mixed messages here. Or as you say, it's kind of messy.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at him sympathetically, he's pulling out all the stops for the Lord.
For sure.
And we're sitting back saying, a little garish, isn't it?
Yeah.
No.
And the other thing too is when God, talked to him before about and answered his prayer and gave him wisdom and said, okay, well, because you didn't ask for wealth and fame and all that, I'm going to give that to you anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a question of what is he going to do with it? How is he going to glorify God with it?
But then again, this gold and the ivory, the throne, the steps, the lions are all his throne, not the altar.
Yeah.
The temple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lee.
Line 24, when it says everyone in the world comes to pay homage to Solomon, and each would bring his tribute. I never see, and the offerings are given to the temple.
Yeah.
That's an interesting
the tribute
observation.
is accepted by Solomon. It's not you bring me the tribute and I in turn offer it to the Lord.
Yeah.
It's mine. It's mine now.
Who were the folks that intercepted the offerings and kept the good stuff for themselves?
Oh yeah. Well, like with the Pharisees and all that stuff, Jesus says that you devour widows' homes, and that's but you also, like, if you remember when we were back in Samuel, when everyone's yelling that we want a king, and Samuel does that thing, he's like, he's going to use you up, use your things, like all this stuff to do. Yeah, and that ends up being what happens, and that's, and it's right there. And I think near the end of it here, like you see all the chariots, and that's remember, that's what chased Israel out into the wilderness. Now we have some time differentiation. You have some, remember we're in Bronze Age and all that stuff. So like there's a lot of tech going on with chariots, but that's kind of a queuing in. And in case we missed it, like it says right there at the end, and he imports all those horses from Egypt. And what's great, like, let's see if we can find it real quick. I'm gonna put it on there. Where's the Deuteronomy verse about Egyptian horses?
Chapter 17.
Oh, Deuteronomy is right in there. Perfect. So Deuteronomy chapter 17. Here, I'll pull that up. I won't put it up on the screen. I'll just pull it up on my Bible. These numbers, Deuteronomy
17:16.
17:16. This is why I make a big deal out of all of those things. So the heading in my Bible is principles for governing kings. And then verse 16 is, but he shall not multiply his horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord said to you, you shall not return that way again. So like it's.
Well, and then the next verse too.
Yeah.
Many wives for yourself.
Yeah, and then don't take many wives, like all these things, lest your heart turn away. And it's like it's a great verse. So it's like stay away from Egyptian horses.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm hung up on location sometimes.
Okay. Yeah.
I told you I wanted to put a few big maps up on the wall.
Yeah.
But in verse 17, there's a reference to the king putting the shields in the house of the forest of Lebanon.
Yeah.
And then in verse 21, there's a reference again to the house of the forest of Lebanon.
Yeah. So that's that guy from Hiram. Mm-hmm. That's that guy. So they made the temple and the palace out of cedar, and they got all those cedars from Lebanon. And so they built all those. And the reason why, I mean, it's a dry climate, so luxury is like wood, like, so then they painted it gold like that. But they did all that because that's like the nice, because it's a rare material. Yeah,
it's part of Solomon's palace.
Yeah, part of his palace.
Yeah.
And so like bringing that bit, like reminds them of where all that came from. So that's great about that Deuteronomy verse. Is like stay away from Egyptian horses and stay away from the wives. And a lot of us probably know what's going on because we're about to get into it with this next chapter. But so he's gone after all these Egyptian horses, and then the very next verse of chapter 11 is King Solomon loved many foreign women as well as daughters of Pharaoh. Like that's like, and you see, like, and that's great that you pointed out that Deuteronomy verse, because it's like the writers here are wanting you to see it. Like, you see what's happening like that. He's going against all these things. Fascinating. All right. Was there anything else from chapter 10?
Just the house of the forest of Lebanon was the main part of the palace. It was 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide.
All right. Yeah. The main part.
According to my.
Yeah. According to the Jewish Study Bible. Yeah. This Bible that I think Ed's got it. Like a few other people have it too. It's what, if you went to a synagogue, this is what they would have. And so it's in English, but yeah. But it is backwards. It's just not completely backwards though. Not completely backwards. But it's not Christian at all. And so
some would disagree about it.
Well, all right. It's very Christian in that, like that. That's in that it is like the bulk of our Old Testament scriptures.
All the prophecies.
Yeah, all the prophecies and all those things. And so,
and why we're here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so, but it's especially in the Old Testament, it gives you a different perspective. A lot of the stuff.
Some of the notes are just amazing.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's do chapter 11, and we'll go through this. So I had this button, and then this. Oh, that button, and then that button. Go to chapter 11. Come on, there we go.
But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods. And his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. So the Lord became angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon,
"Because you have done this, and have not kept my covenant and my statutes which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you, and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen."
Now the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was a descendant of the king in Edom. For it happened, when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain, after he had killed every male in Edom, because for 6 months Joab remained there with all Israel, until he had cut down every male in Edom, that Hadad fled to go to Egypt, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him. Hadad was still a little child. Then they arose from Midian, and came to Paran, and they took men with them from Paran, and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house, apportioned food for him, and gave him land. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him as wife the sister of his own wife, that is, the sister of Queen Tahpenes. Then the sister of Tahpenes bore him Genubath, his son, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's household among the sons of Pharaoh. So when Hadad heard in Egypt that David rested with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh,
"Let me depart, that I may go to my own country."
"But what have you lacked with me, that suddenly you seek to go to your own country?"
"Nothing, but do let me go anyway."
And God raised up another adversary against him, Rezon, the son of Eliada, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah. So he gathered men to him and became captain over a band of raiders when David killed those of Zobah. And they went to Damascus and dwelt there and reigned in Damascus. He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, besides the trouble that Hadad caused. And he abhorred Israel and reigned over Syria. Then Solomon's servant Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zereda, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. And this is what caused him to rebel against the king. Solomon had built the Millo and repaired the damages to the city of David his father. The man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing that the young man was industrious, made him the officer over all the labor force of the house of Joseph. Now it happened at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah, the Shilonite, met him on the way, and he had clothed himself with a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. Then Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam,
"Take for yourself 10 pieces. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to you. But he shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me, and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the people of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways, to do what is right in my eyes, and keep my statutes and my judgments, as did his father David. However, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, because I have made him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand and give it to you, 10 tribes, and to his son I will give 1 tribe, that my servant David may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself, to put my name there. So I will take you, and you shall reign over all your heart desires, and you shall be king over Israel. Then it shall be, if you heed all that I command you, walk in my ways, and do what is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did. Then I will be with you and build for you an enduring house, as I built for David, and will give Israel to you. And I will afflict the descendants of David because of this, but not forever."
Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon? And the period that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Then Solomon rested with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his place.
Okay. All right. So there's a little bit going on here. So what so that I don't forget, I'm going to say what I want to say. I think chapter 10 is setting us up. All the damage happened in 10. and we're just seeing it play out in 11. Like that's that's what's going on here. That he became Egypt, that he became Babylon, and like basically, I think, and I say this a lot, and every time I read this stuff, I become more convinced of it. Is that my thing about the Babylonian captivity and all of that Israel goes into is that they wanted to be Babylon so bad. They wanted to be Egypt so bad. And that God basically, well, if you want to be them so bad, here you go. Here you go. You can be them. And I think that's what I was kind of seeing there near the end of all this, is that it's like had all this stuff and just kind of just, there you go. Like you can be this thing.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So yeah. So all right, what else stood out to you?
I have a question.
Uh-oh.
There's no statement in here that the people themselves did not like what was going on. Are we to assume that the people were as corrupt as Solomon then? I mean, I would think with him putting all these different temples up for the wives to worship in, nobody said anything?
I think that's a good assumption. If there's nothing said, I think you're probably making a good assumption there. I don't have a good answer for you right off the.
Go back to Judges in that area. It does say that the people were evil in the sight of the Lord. The new people didn't recognize him.
Yeah.
You know, after that first generation,
and they kind of moved with the judges.
The next generation was an evil, and they went to the idols of other gods. What do want to call them? So it's kind of the leader in this. We'll be in that next.
that is good grounds then for kind of what the leader is doing is kind of what the people are doing.
People were just to blame as much as he was.
Yeah.
And I thought it was cute that the New King James said labor forces.
Oh, yeah.
28.
It was verse 28.
Forced labor.
Forced labor. That's interesting. The King James has cleaned up that language a lot that we've noticed. That was 28, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why would you imagine that they would want to clean it up? Slave labor in anybody's Bible, no?
Yeah, and it says labor force.
The St. James
version. Well, like I think. So what was it? 1614? No, it's a fair question. Like a lot of times, power is continued off the backs of people that can't say anything for themselves, and how that is expressed through empires, other times is often through slavery, and like that's. And so I think that's and so they're not denying it, and it could just be syntax of how the King James is putting it too.
Yeah, I haven't read it in the old King James.
Yeah, does it say labor force in yours, or does it say in verse 28? Does it say labor force, or does it say forced labor? It's the very end of verse 28. Gloria is keeping the King James alive.
New International says labor.
11, chapter 11, verse 28.
28?
Yeah.
Says labor force.
ESV does forced labor.
Yeah.
NLT is labor force.
Yeah.
11:28 doesn't say anything like that.
Oh, at the very end of it?
Like the last line.
Labor force of the house of Joseph. Yeah, and it could just be syntax difference too, because
he appointed him over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, interesting. For the King James Version?
Yeah, what does it say?
And the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valor, and Solomon, seeing the the young man that he was industrious, he made him ruler over all the charge of the house of Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just yeah. So like that's so it's well all right, when we get where that sounds like a pretty big difference. Let's look it up real quick. All right, let's see. Sure. Let's see. Kings.
He was the one that was the first king of Israel.
Yeah.
Lutheran Bible is
That guy there.
about forced labor.
Yeah.
Was the Judah one.
Okay, so Zoom, I will put you guys on here. Share screen. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, the labor force. So let's see what this word is. So,
Forced labor, I saw it there.
Yeah, the forced labor. Over all the charge, which I bet you over all the charge means something in Old English. like that. That's I bet that's what's going, and it's an idiom that it just isn't used anymore. And so let's see. And there's only what's this similar. Burdens is also kind of how it's been used. So yeah, forced labor. So interesting. So yeah, so like I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it's interesting when you see this forced labor kind of all around, and it's not necessarily it's when we put ourselves in the mindset of what it would mean to be people that were freed from Egypt, like God in chapter 9 said. It's like, remember, I took you out of Egypt, and then all this other stuff is happening. That's not good. And
that's two different messages: forced labor and labor force. That's totally
yeah. And so it is too different. But I think we could get caught up in it, but I think we can see what's happening around.
Was there any other kind of labor force but forced labor?
That's what I was thinking. This is a way of life for these people.
This is how we got things done with forced labor, call it what you will. It's still slave labor.
And that's why I thought where was it? When it's listing all of his achievements, and it's saying that the forced laborers were all from these different conquered areas and all that stuff. Because I do just like what we said. There's all bad. It's not all bad. It's not all good. And there are. Like, you can think back in when you were children. Somebody can think back that far, and that's and like you can if you remember, like there's things that were said and done even back then that today we're like, ooh, wouldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. Like that's even in our own lifetimes. And so as heinous as it is back then, it is how they would accomplish things. But I do think it's kind of pointing out that it's like, and this is kind of I think it's kind of talking about who this person is.
Further back.
Yeah.
In this book.
And I think the different parts about it we're talking about Solomon is much more judgy towards it than what that one would be.
Well, I mean, also, if you're just reading it one chapter at a time, it's easy to be like, well, why doesn't it say forced labor? It has already in the past 2 chapters. So if we're just reading it in continuum, when you're in a continuum, then it makes a difference. Yes.
Yeah. So that's
what
interesting.
I liked about this type of Bible study, and going all the way back to the original when we met over in the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Just read big chunks and then talk about it.
Yeah. What this Bible study used to be So we met over in the sanctuary, and we would listen to the Bible being read from this for 45 minutes, and then we take 15 minutes to talk about what we did. What was great about that, I mean, we almost read the entire Bible that way, and we it forced you out of thinking about the individual verses.
Mm-hmm.
It forced you out of that. And then when COVID happened, we kind of went to this model, and this model has been great so far. How we do this, because we still read a ton.
Yeah.
And so like that's, but yeah. So what else stood out to you in this?
It took me a hot minute to wrap my head around ripping up the cloak in 12 pieces.
Oh yeah.
You get 10, he gets 1. Where's the other one?
Oh yeah.
The temple.
Yeah.
So they don't
get it.
They don't get anything.
So
But it took me a minute. I'm like, where's the other one? My math is not adding up.
Use it as a fig leaf, yes.
Yeah. So that's a good example about what he's doing. Now, with the stuff that we've talked about over the last few months, did that sound familiar to you anywhere else? And stuff that's going on in Samuel.
Yeah.
What did you want to say something, Lee?
No, I'm just saying Samuel. That was.
Yeah, Samuel tore. Yeah, Samuel tore Saul's coat, and then also David did it to Saul in the cave.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is that. Well, we didn't really talk about it much because it's kind of hard to explain. This makes it a lot easier. That they take this garment and they rip it all up, and that's a sign of you're not in charge anymore.
Yeah.
Like I'm ripping this.
Diminishing.
Yeah.
Even the rip in the cave was a diminishment. You already know what's going on.
Yeah. Like it's like this kind of like symbol of it all. So like, and that was whole David's like points. Like, I could use this, and I'm not going to. As he comes out of that cave, and so and here in 11, they're using it.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're using it, and you could see that it is the taking. Like you have Israel and Judah now. You have the thing, and the thing, Heather, that we've been talking about that I thought was fascinating when we were going through 1st and 2nd Samuel is around the time of Bathsheba. Was it that all of a sudden they stopped talking about the unified kingdom, and they start talking about Judah and Israel, and how they're still together. But it's like this subtle nod. It's like you're paying attention to what's coming. And that I hadn't caught that before until we went through it there. If it's around that time of Bathsheba, that starts happening. Yeah, maybe a little bit before, but it's around that same time. When David's ascent to power, all of a sudden it starts talking about the kingdoms being separate. In a subtle way.
God, these things.
So, were there anything else from this?
Well, verse 15, Joab, the commander of the army, he slew every male in Edom. Why did that happen?
So I think it's just talking about how powerful he is. So the Lord raised up this guy. And he's like, he killed everybody type of thing. Yeah, like that's like all the males. 'Cause remember, this was a patriarchal society, like very male driven. And so, then the women would become servants and, and all concubines, all that stuff. Like that's, yeah.
Women weren't even permitted in the temple.
Yeah. So that's kind of what's going on. I think it's really just telling like he's the stuff. He's a mighty warrior. I know that's what you think about me. Like that's a guy who can slay hundreds of men. I hear what you're saying.
I'm not going to be sitting here.
So let's see. So was there? I do think that first adversary that comes from Egypt is very interesting. So like he's been seeking the power of Egypt the whole time. And then that adversary is raised up from Egypt. Like that, it's kind of beautiful. It's not the right word, but it's kind of this poeticness to it that this is how it all is falling.
And then in 40, when he tries to kill Jeroboam, he flees to Egypt.
Yeah.
And stays there until Solomon's dead. And so both of his adversaries are coming.
Yeah.
Right from what he wanted to become.
And then how it all begins with the with all the chariots and the horses from Egypt, and then with his own daughters and the Moabites and all the wives, and what I think is happening is all these wives, all of his wealth has come from his wives. Those are all treaties, and like you get a wife when like you when you make a deal, a trade deal with someone else, they would, as collateral, they put their wife down. And so he's just got hundreds of wives that all represent his wealth. And so I don't like to view this as, oh, it's the wives that took him down, but it was what the wives meant, that it was that just pursuit of this unlimited power, is what took him down and made him worship all the other gods and all those things. And the wives are a stand-in for that. And you see what the wives brought through the Queen of Sheba stuff and all of that, just that unlimited power. And then it just starts talking about it all there. Yeah.
Shut down every male and Edom. Very thematic. I mean,
yeah.
Pharaoh did a little of that same stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really new to these folks. They have a template already by a guy named Pharaoh.
Yeah, yeah. Like absolute decimation. Mm-hmm. Decimation.
I think it's odd that Joseph took Jesus to Egypt to protect him.
So that's that whole Exodus or Christmas story thing, because I think like Joseph, it runs back down to Egypt, and then you see the salvation of God is coming out of Egypt again. Okay. So Joseph, he's born in Bethlehem, has to flee from a Pharaoh-like person out, except he goes to Egypt. I think Matthew was doing that to cue into us. It's like, hey, remember when the last time God saved his people? Hey, remember that? And then he comes out, and Jesus even crosses his own sea, which is the Jordan with the baptism and the wilderness, you have it's all there, and so the way Matthew scripts it all is all in. And I think some people think I'm crazy when I'm talking about the Egyptian horses and all of this stuff. But when you read these things, it's all themes of what's bad and what's good. And then when you pick up the Christmas story in Matthew and you see those same themes come out through the birth of Jesus, it becomes really interesting. And what you see is that even though the disciples sought power at times, mm-hmm. that Jesus never went that way, that instead of going the same way as Solomon, because remember, the disciples want to be lifted up his right and his left in his glory, lifted up, all those things. Jesus went the other way. He went towards the cross. He didn't, in all of his wisdom and all of those things, he went to nothing rather than all the wealth of Solomon. And so that in his salvation and his resurrection, it's then working to put us and the whole creation back to rights. Mm-hmm. It fits in with this whole thing, and it's fascinating when you can catch glimpses of it. And that was a good, I don't know who got us there, but that was a good gospel nugget. Right? And so
about the theme?
Yeah, about the theming with the gospel of Jesus and all that stuff. So the Christmas stuff, that was Heather's fault. It was Heather's fault. Your fault. It's all of us. That's what makes this class good. I enjoy this class. It's why I want to do Judges with you guys next, because it'll make the sermon series better in a year. So
it comes back to you.
Yeah.
At least he's honest.
What did God say about that?
Well, I want to make sure we had ample time, because there for a little bit with the Samuel Bible study, I was like, are we going to catch up? I can't have that, because what was it, 3 weeks ahead? We ended the Samuel Bible study. We ended the sermon series, because the sermon series moves faster than the Bible study.
I have another question.
Uh-oh. Oh, my goodness, Anne. Oh, my goodness.
These little things, but verse 21, David slept with his father. And then verse 43, and Solomon slept with his fathers.
Yeah.
And he died.
It's like catacombs. So like it's like where he went into the earth with his father. So they would bury him like where the other kings are buried and all of that stuff. That kind of language, where they're sleeping with their father, sleeping with the family now type of thing. Think of like the French catacombs and think of like, I don't know, like some of those classic medieval movies that you think of, like with the kings. Yeah, Valley of the Kings. Like that.
I don't watch that.
But that's kind of what that means. It means he died. He died. So good stuff. So we'll end there. So everyone that's watching on YouTube, the pre-recorded, thanks for watching.